Hello, and thanks for joining us on Relational Practice, a social work podcast. I'm Dr. Jodie Park.
I'm Rose Mackey, and we're both private practice social workers here in New South Wales, Australia, who work in the fields of out-of-home care, child protection, and trauma. And today we're reporting on Darwin Land.
As always, we'd love you to follow our podcast and connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, and via our new YouTube page. We'll be adding content and videos to all platforms regularly.
And as always, please send us any practice stories, questions, or comments to relationalpractice01@gmail.com.
All right, today we're going to talk about grief and loss in social work practice, which I'm kind of excited about.
And look, I wrote why with a question mark. I did. When you first suggested it, yes, it makes sense to follow ambiguous loss, to do an episode on grief and loss. When you suggested it, I was like, oh, really? And then you sent me the outline for, what the episode could be. And I did a bit more reading it. And I was like, you idiot, Rose. Of course. It's one theory, one framework, one issue that is dealt with in nearly every setting of social work you can possibly think of.
Yeah, I agree. Firstly, though, I don't think you're in it.
But I am, because it was like, how did I not consciously make the connection before now?
But I think a lot of people make the connection. Like, I think loss is, because I think grief and loss, we usually think about it in terms of someone dying, so mourning.
Correct.
But, and I think our work on ambiguous loss has taught us that loss is different to grieving the loss of a loved one. Loss can mean lots of different things.
Yes. And I think it also is the placement of the words grief and loss. If you think about them separately, what is grief and then what is loss?
Yeah.
And then through a social work lens, you go, oh my goodness, it is so relevant in so many different practicing fields of social work.
Yeah.
It's kind of startling to me that it's, again, we've talked about this in attachment theory. Why isn't it more deeply taught at university?
Well, because I think the focus is on bereavement, really, which is the mourning stuff.
Which I understand, but from a social work lens, if you think about all the different settings a social worker could practice in, grief and loss is so relevant.
Well, I feel like it permeates through everything. Like, it's about the loss of a role, the loss of a loved one, the loss of a child, the loss of your care of a child. It's the loss of your independence. It's the loss of so many different things. You know what I mean?
I do. Which is why I think I'm an idiot for not thinking about how much it actually impacts social work.
All right. So what we thought we would cover is some key theories around and models of grief.
Do you have a definition for us first? We always bring a definition.
I think I did bring a definition.
Really?
No.
So that kind of surprises me.
Same. Let's think about it. Anyway, we'll talk about theories.
Okay.
You'll have a good theory. We'll talk a little bit about social workers' role, just the different things. And then I think we will probably talk about practice.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Before we start, I have a semi-definition from Glenda Fisk.
Good on you.
Who says, at its core, however, grief may be conceptualized as a natural reaction to the loss of someone or something that is loved due to death, illness, or major life events.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I like that definition.
When you think about it, because it is such a grief and loss, it covers so many, like you said, loss of a role, loss of a loved one, loss of even a possibility. If you think about miscarriage, again, it's kind of hard to define exactly.
Loss of hope.
Loss of hope.
And I think there's lots of stuff it talks about in social work. If you want to practice from that kind of empowerment lens, then it's about promoting hope. And I think, if you lose hope that things might change, then I think that would be pretty devastating.
Agreed. Absolutely. Got a practice story we can talk about later about that.
Perfect. Yeah, perfect. All right. Okay, let's get into it. Let's talk about some of the key theories around grief and loss. The first one that kind of came to my mind was around the work of Kübler-Ross, 5 Stages of Grief.
Yeah.
And so this model describes a series of emotional stages that a person may experience when facing death or a loss. Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance are those stages. And I think that's kind of well known, isn't it? That, this notion that when you're managing or when you're working through grief, that it's a staged process. And I think there's lots of pop culture that talks about kind of moving through the anger stage and moving through denial and getting to bargaining.
So do you think that's linear?
Well, I think Kübler-Ross says it is, but no. I read Kübler-Ross many years ago.
Yeah.
Many years ago, and I think how sometimes they make stuff up and it becomes truth. I think sometimes what I remember is that it is a bit of a linear process, but you can kind of go back. Like it doesn't have to be this and then this and then this.
Okay.
I think that in a perfect world is how it would happen, but at any time you can kind of go back to a different stage.
And you know why I think you may think like that?
Why?
Because I discovered in preparing for this that the Kübler-Ross 5 Stages of Grief was originally designed as a framework for people who were facing their own death. It wasn't actually designed to be used for people who were mourning or going through grief and loss, losing someone. So in the 1960s, because I think it was around that time.
1969.
Yeah, okay. So in the 1960s, this framework became a framework to understand grieving because there was not much research or any other framework to support grief and loss in practice. But Kübler-Ross actually, as I understand it, designed this for people facing their own deaths, which is why I think you could say it would be linear to move through that process if you were facing your own death.
Yeah, that makes sense.
You think about, what was the first stage?
What was the first stage?
Acceptance?
The first stage was denial.
Denial.
Then anger, then bargaining, then depression, and then acceptance.
So that would make sense if you come from that lens, isn't it? If that
makes perfect sense.
And maybe why it's not necessarily always going to be a good framework for people that are grieving.
Mm-hmm.
Because that acceptance, there's a lot of research and discussion around people that are mourning the loss of someone, a role, hope, whatever it may be. There's a lot of research to say that there's not much support that people get to the idea of acceptance.
Well, I think that's ambiguous loss, isn't it? Do you know what I mean? That's kind of where that comes in. Because ambiguous loss is about a loss that's confusing. And, if you kind of are mourning the loss of something or someone, then it's significant. Then it's really, and you can't get to acceptance, which you might never get to acceptance. It might always be this level of ambiguity attached to that loss.
Yeah.
Which makes sense. It does. Makes perfect sense. And do you think it's about, instead of kind of seeing like the acceptance stage as being the ultimate goal, do you think it's more about learning how to adapt to the loss?
How to now live a life without this person, without this role, without this identity.
Yeah.
Yeah. How do I carry the grief and keep living knowing that this is what it looks like?
And I think that's where social work practice is so important.
I would agree.
Because that is such a strong social work role, isn't it? Helping people or empowering people to contemplate life that might have some different parameters. Does that make sense? Did I use the right word? Yeah, I think I did. Yeah.
Yeah. It's that understanding what's within your circle of control.
Yeah.
What's within your circle of influence.
Yeah.
And then what's in your circle of concern. Yes, it's part of and it could be quite pervasive or showing up in your daily life.
Yeah.
But you can't change things. And so that's your circle of concern. And as a social worker, it's about helping clients or families understand that, yes, it's very much there, but we can't change it or we can't go back. And so how do we accept that? And this is what life is now. This is what we can control. This is what we can influence. And how do we how do we function within those parameters?
I mean, I think using the circle of control and influence is a great tool to kind of help people to understand how things might be different now, what that's going to look like. But also it is around knowing what you can actually control, what is in your circle of influence promotes hope, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Do you use that circle of influence and control a lot?
Yeah, I love it.
Same. You can use it for anything, can't you?
Children, young people.
Oh my God.
Older people.
Clinical
Anyone.
supervision. I use it a lot in clinical supervision with people. It's such a great tool.
Yeah, I do love it. I did it last week actually with a 10-year-old.
Yeah.
And the language was a bit tricky to start with.
Yeah.
But once she got it, she was like, I'll tell you everything I can control.
It's amazing. It's a great tool.
Mm.
And I love, any good tool should have adaptability. And I love that you can adapt that tool to suit anything.
Yeah. Yeah, it's great.
Sorry, sideline. All right. Okay. So that's the one for Kübler-Ross. Did I ever tell you when I actually read Kübler-Ross?
Tell me.
I remember reading Kübler-Ross when I was doing my first social work placement.
Back in the dark ages.
As a student in a hospital. And my job really was to talk older people into accepting residential placement.
What ward were you
on? It was a really small hospital. So there was maybe 3 wards in total. And this was kind of like the general medical ward. So I think
it's not palliative care.
No. I think it was surgical ward, and there was a general medical ward. There was a huge mental health ward attached to this hospital as well that had its own separate kind of social work kind of team. So pretty sure there was 2 or 3 wards that the social workers that I was attached to actually oversaw.
And your role was facilitating a conversation or facilitating an entry into?
Facilitating an agreement.
An agreement.
Like, first placement for a social worker. This was one of the key roles that I had. All independent. So
it's so fascinating.
I know. I was so fascinated as well.
So did your supervisor suggest, here, read this 5 Stages of Grief book? Or were you like, I got to understand grief. I have to understand grief and lots a bit better. Let me research myself.
I don't know how I came across it. I mean, the supervisor was amazing. I had 2 supervisors and they were both amazing. And so I imagine she probably said, read this, it'll be helpful. And it was helpful. I still remember reading it. Like, I remember being fascinated by the fact that there was this theory of grief. I've never known a theory of grief before reading that book.
Yeah.
And it made so much sense.
And I imagine it would, because it's almost the way in which it's designed, right? It's like to help people move through their life and what's facing them. And what was facing your clients was obviously a residential nursing home.
Yeah, these were older people who could no longer live at home, and because the existing supports they had, or the possible supports, in-home supports, couldn't sustain them living at home safely anymore. And so there had to be, there was no real choice. They had to accept nursing home placement. So my job as the social work student,
first placement,
was to have the conversations around, but it was really useful for me. I remember being terrified at the time, the first few times, but it kind of meant that I got to spend my day talking to some amazing, amazing older people. And we, thankfully, after reading Kübler-Ross, I realized that you needed to have conversations with people about their life to help them to kind of get themselves to that point where they understand, or they acknowledge that they actually need additional supports that they can't get at home.
You know what else I really like? It's difficult. I'm imagining a very young Dr. Parky, because we're old.
Yes.
Trotting on into her first placement in a hospital, with all the hope and goodwill that we normally start out with as social workers.
Mm-hmm.
But that first placement is grounded you in a theory of grief and loss that is applicable then in every other setting you've worked in.
Yeah, really true. I'm so lucky to have had that as my first placement. And I'm so lucky to have been able to learn from the two social workers that I had who were supervising me, because they were so empathetic, but also so grounded in reality. And that's kind of how I practice, isn't it?
Such a balance.
Yeah, and I think I learned that from them.
Wow. That's really impressive,
I think, it's luck, isn't it? Social work placements are all luck.
All luck, but impressive that throughout your whole career, you've held on to the learnings, kept true to like found an authentic way to practice straight up and kept true to that through all these years.
I feel like it's luck. Like it had nothing to do with me knowing what I was doing. I'm very used to fumbling through, but being able to reflect back, I feel I'm really lucky that that was the experience I had, because it was so foundational.
So can I ask, just how did you, reading the book, how did that help shape your practice on that placement?
I think, like I said before, it helped me to understand that one, grief was a process. It helped me to understand grief full stop, to be fair. But also it helped me to kind of get back to the basis of getting people to talk about themselves, getting people to kind of really reflect on their life.
Kind of sits really nicely with attachment theory, doesn't it?
Really nicely.
Because to know the self and how we are in relationships, how we view the world, which is in essence, I think, what you're talking about, getting them to talk about themselves.
But also, I've only just since found this out in the last, say, 5 or so years, it really also sits really nicely with the theories of human development and about aging well.
Yes.
Yeah. So aging emotionally safe, in an emotionally safe way, and being able to go back and reflect on what has happened in your life and moving through that kind of stage to minimize regret.
I don't regret.
I know, regret. Okay. All right. We're a little off topic, but
other theories then.
Okay.
Let's get back on.
So the dual process model by Strubenschut. Is that how you say that, do you think?
That's how I would say it.
I didn't actually know much about this model, but I can tell you that it came out in 1999.
And I love the name, the Journal of Death Studies.
Journal of Death Studies.
Doesn't that make you go, oh, I'm curious, let me go find that, read lots. Makes me want to go read. Yep.
It really, well, does it?
Yes, it does. No, I'm not. I'm dead serious.
I don't know if it will make me want to read more.
Oh, I'm curious.
Because I instantly think about, why does my brain instantly go to like a murder mystery or something?
I don't know. We're in social work practice. We're not in TV land. I think this model, it's the one that I love how you say it, oscillates between two modes. So loss oriented, so focusing on the emotional pain of the loss. So reminiscing, telling stories, sharing the life and how it was, and active. So that's actively mourning. You're actively talking about things and sharing. And then restoration oriented, so engaging in daily life. So understanding this is what life looks like now without this person or that role or, that hope.
Yeah.
And how do I develop a new routine or a new way of being without what I've lost?
I actually really like this model. I really do.
Because it makes sense, doesn't it?
Makes so much sense, because it, basically says that you need to have both of those orientations kind of actively working to be able to move through and it's about grieving, it's about bereavement, but to be able to move through that process.
And I think what the model says is you have to have both for healthy coping. And I again don't think this is, you complete your loss oriented.
No.
And then you go to restoration oriented. It's very much
works at the same time.
Yeah.
Kind of happens in
tandem. Yeah.
And I also like the focus on, like talking about it, not leaving things stuck in your head. I really like that reminiscing part of that, of focusing on that loss.
That processing and re-editing and reiterating stories.
Yes, I really like that.
I wonder why you do like that.
I know, true. So that's a cool model that I actually might read more about.
See, go to The death studies, the Journal of Death Studies.
I know. I mean, I know that 2 minutes ago is pretty.
See, now you're curious, aren't you?
I am curious. You're right. You just have to let me keep talking and I'll always see it your way. All right. So next model, Continuing Bonds Theory by Klaas, Silverman and Nickman, and that came out in 1996. And this theory challenges the idea that letting go is the only path to healing. It suggests that maintaining a psychological connection with the deceased through memories, rituals, or internal conversations can be a healthy and constructive way to grieve. So again, it's theory around bereavement.
And I think I like this model as well because it means that you can have your memories and you can have times where you are actively still mourning the loss or remembering life before what the new world order looks like.
Yeah.
But also that you don't have to then accept it, let it go, put it in a box and it's done. It's not a neat package. You can live life without a person, but you can still remember them, talk about them, mourn for them, cry over them, but live your life still without them.
Yeah. I guess it's about acknowledging that person is always going to have a role and an important role. I mean, I can see how it could become problematic. Like, I think if you, when we're working with people that are stuck.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? I think that I can, I can kind of see how if you're working with someone who is stuck and they're stuck in their grief, like they're stuck in this kind of trauma response to losing someone who clearly is really quite important to them, then I can see that focusing on this person having a continuing role in their life might not always be healthy.
So I'm thinking about working with clients who maybe have a TBI, traumatic brain injury, autism, or clients that loop or ruminate and it's a really fixed psychological mindset and not very able to, learn new things or move or be challenged on certain things. I can understand how that would be very tricky too, to be stuck in a grief cycle where we're fixated. But I think this model, and I'm not talking about being fixated, but just being able to have a space where you can continue to talk about a person when something reminds you of them, when you're driving down a familiar road or, sometimes you smell a particular scent from olden roses that have a beautiful smell.
Yeah.
Don't know where you guys are listening from, but in Australia, if you buy roses from the nursery to plant, they don't usually have a scent. My grandma's roses always have a scent.
Yeah.
So, sometimes when I smell particularly roses with a scent in, I think about my nan and I might then share a story. I don't think that's about being stuck or fixated. It's just about remembering.
Yeah, and that's the reminiscing part of it, isn't it? No, I don't think that's about being stuck at all. I think that's kind of, that's a healthy, emotionally healthy way, I think, to remember the person that you've lost. But I think we all can, I know that I could definitely think of some practice examples where people, because it's a attachment dysregulation, and usually it's about this intense emotional response to any loss because of relationship drama in the past, that it's really tricky for people to actually ever get to that point of acknowledging this person is no longer there.
Yes.
And that's what I mean by being a little stuck.
Yeah. I think it was good to clarify that.
Yeah.
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 Because I agree, 100%. Agree. Tricky space to work.
I think it would be a very tricky space to work. Like I think though, when you think about it, I think if you work with trauma, then you're kind of working with some of this stuff.
Don't you think? I think it's tricky though every day, don't you?
Yeah.
Is it just me?
No, it's not just you.
And I think it's tricky because trauma disrupts relationships.
Yeah.
It's a chronic disruption of relational patterns, relationships, how we view ourselves, all that internal model, how you view the world, and then add a layer of grief and loss onto that.
Yeah.
I find it very tricky.
Yeah, it's really hard. I think it's a hard space to work. particularly when people feel very hopeless about there ever being any change, about them ever feeling any differently. And I think that, that can happen more, in relation to lots of different issues that might be happening for people, not just grief and loss. But definitely, it could be part of it. Yeah. All right. So the last one is Disenfranchised Grief by Doga, and this kind of came out in 1989. And we talked about this when we did the episode on ambiguous loss. Kenny Core talked a lot about disenfranchised grief and what it actually is. Yeah. But Doga's theory says that disenfranchised grief refers to grief that is not openly acknowledged, publicly mourned, or socially supported. It often occurs when a relationship, the loss itself, or the griever is not recognized by society. Examples include the death of a work colleague, a pet, or a loss due to stigmatized illness.
I wonder, I've been thinking about this for hours and not sure whether or not I wanted to bring it up, but I'm going to just throw it at you and see what your reaction is. I've been thinking about parents and friends who so have a daughter or a son, but normally a daughter, who is a victim of domestic violence, and friends of that victim as well of domestic violence, and how their grief could be quite disenfranchised when their daughter or friend is no longer who they knew once, because they're so isolated and controlled. All of the coercive control changes how they can actually interact with their family and their friends. And it impacts them. They're in survival mode generally, just trying to survive the relationship. And there's a real change in how the person they once knew shows up now because of the domestic violence and the impact it has on them. Do you think that there's a grief and loss around if you're watching your daughter in a domestic violence relationship, or you no longer able to have contact with your daughter or son because they were in such a controlling relationship?
I think there'd have to be a grief response to that, because how do you make sense of that changed relationship, particularly if you feel like you have no control or influence over helping change the relationship? There'd have to be some grief attached to that.
And maybe it is spoken about, but I guess looking at domestic violence through a lens of grief and loss and what it means for the wider support network that maybe once was. And as a lens, because I started to use that with someone I'm working with, to use it as a lens to look at what's actually showing up for this client, because she has, and when I say lost her daughter, I don't mean her daughter has died at the hands of domestic violence, but is in a domestic violent relationship. And the coercive control is very significant, and their relationship is absolutely non-existent because of the domestic violence now.
I think that's a really important point to raise. And I think that's one of those instances where you wouldn't automatically attach a grief response to that scenario, would you?
Well, I haven't until very recently. I was like, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
This is actually, and maybe everyone else is aware of it and I'm late to the party. That often happens. But I was like, why haven't I read anything about this or heard anything about this? This is a very helpful way to work with this particular client around the loss of her daughter to this domestically violent relationship.
Well, it fits really nicely when you think about it from a grief lens or a grief and loss lens, because you're really grieving the loss of the relationship as it was.
Yes.
And hopeful of reimagining a relationship in the future, but you don't know, because that sits outside of your circle of influence and concern.
And I think there's then, in this case anyway, a layer of ambiguous loss around their role as grandparents, their children, and how they imagined, I guess, their role as grandparents, and it looks nothing like that because they're not allowed access, or time with the grandchildren. So also they had this ideal of what grandparenting would be. And it's, again, there's the relationship. And I guess the stigma attached to my daughter's in a domestic violent relationship. I can't see my grandchildren because of the control. It's probably not a coffee shop conversation you're having with your friends, is it?
No. And this the disenfranchised grief attached to that. To that whole thing, because how do you explain why you don't have a relationship with your grandchildren? You'd have to develop your own narrative to kind of understand that yourself, and then you'd have to develop a narrative to explain it to other people. It's a little bit like when I work with children, and it's about helping them to understand. Just say we're talking about something that may have happened in their past that was someone who harmed them. It's about helping them to understand what that harm has meant for them, and then helping them to develop a narrative to explain that to themselves and to others. And we, for some kids, I go as far as we write down a little script, because then that gives, kind of gives hope that they can actually explain this to somebody else, and they don't have to. They can be in control of the information that's shared.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. Because it's all in that narrative, isn't it? It's about how do you make sense. It's the sense-making stuff. Is probably a better word than narrative. Like, how do you make sense of what is occurring in your relationship with that person that's really important to you?
Yeah.
It's a great point.
Yeah, I think I'm very late to the party on that one, but it is, yeah. And then obviously drug and alcohol and mental health.
Yeah, of course.
And relationships change because of those factors.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really that intersection, isn't it, between, those two more than two, but we're talking about domestic violence and grief and loss still, or even domestic violence, like you said, and drug and alcohol. Looking at the individual or the family functioning from either one of those lenses helps you to explain something in a certain way, and then by actually, trying to, I guess in one way, squash those lenses together and make sense of this from that kind of bigger perspective. Yeah. Big.
And see, so important. So social work, so many. Where I guess, where does it not show up, grief and loss, in social work? Is the question.
Yeah, and I think it shows up everywhere, doesn't it? But you're right. Why is it not something that is more widely acknowledged or taught even in social work education? And I know grief and loss is taught. I mean, I think in my experience as a social work academic, it permeates through different subjects, talking about grief and loss, but there wasn't a specific subject that was around grief and loss in the degree that I was involved in.
Not mine.
Yeah, or me when I did my study.
Hence why I'm late to the party, and why your first placement, I think, kind of was such a nice platform to start your social work journey on, because if you can understand grief and loss,
yeah, that's true.
What a valuable tool to have as a social work practitioner or a practitioner.
Well, and I've never really, but I guess it's really, I've not reflected upon how important that placement was for a very long time. Yeah, but it was so important because it did teach me a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Stuff that I still, it really taught me a lens, didn't it, about how I still kind of think about practice and apply practice.
Definitely.
I was lucky.
You were so lucky.
Could have ended badly. Thankfully it didn't.
Yeah, thankfully it didn't.
All right. Should we talk more about the social work role then?
Yep, let's do that.
Okay.
So social workers, as Jodie has said, often, I think already today, provides a unique and invaluable contribution to grief and loss care. And I guess a social worker's role extends beyond just emotional support and can include things like practical assistance and advocacy as well. So if you think about the emotional support lens, that's about either the processing or the talk therapy, validating providing information about grief and loss and this, and again, circle of control and influence. And that's your one-on-one or group work or counselling spaces. So that's where social workers play a role. And we'll talk a little bit later on about when grief and trauma collide. But there's obviously a very vital role for social workers in natural disasters and hugely traumatic incidences or events in society. So practical assistance, so that's about connecting our clients with resources or support groups, financial assistance programs, or whatever other services, that referral pathways, and making sure our clients' basic needs are met throughout times of grief and loss, and then also throughout our work with them. Advocacy. So, I mean, how often does a social worker's role not involve advocacy? Again, a lot of our work is about advocacy. So advocating for whatever system it is that they're really intersecting with around their grief and loss, helping them navigate complex medical or legal processes. So coroner's court, if you think about just that process, how a social worker can help advocate through even a court process when someone may have been, family members being murdered, or there's a criminal element to it. And then end-of-life palliative care, the advocacy that occurs in that space too, that social workers provide.
Yeah. And it's very role dependent, isn't it?
So role dependent.
Yeah. Because there's some roles where you would probably do much more advocacy than others. And I think one of the biggest things I think that I do in my role is that I kind of do advocate for the person just to be allowed to feel.
Yes. And I think if you look at that in a grief and loss lens, that is, just might call it quiet advocacy. We're not placarding and we're not changing systems, but you're actually advocating for your client, for the systems he or she or they intersect with, to just understand, one, who they are, and two, allow them to be as they are, to feel their feelings, and to, a bit of empathy around what they're going through.
Well, and for them to understand that it's all okay, and that there isn't just this one-size-fits-all approach to grieving or to understanding, the way life has changed because of the loss they've endured.
And I think it's a little bit like trauma too, isn't it? That it's not this distant event that happened years ago, that it's actually at certain times pervasive and impacting on their daily functioning, or just a factor to consider when thinking about a certain person. That the loss might have been a year ago, but it's not in a nice neat box and we're not done with it.
Oh, the loss could have been 10 years ago, or the loss could have been, 2 weeks ago.
Yes.
It's always so dependent on how the person, I guess, interacts with that loss.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's such a big topic, isn't it?
It is. So I'm very apologetic for being like, when you mentioned it.
I didn't know you were like that.
I was like, what are we going to talk about?
Yeah, that's true. But I think that about most weeks.
Do you?
Yeah, I do.
Well, that makes me feel better.
I do. I think, how are we going to fill an hour?
It's also too because I automatically went to death of a person, and I'm a crier. I cry in ads. So I was like, can I get through this podcast episode without crying?
That's really funny, because I think when I first met you, I would never have thought you were a crier.
No, I have such a strong exterior in lots of settings. Yes, but I'm a huge softie.
Yeah, I mean, I know.
I know it now, but yeah.
Yeah.
I love a good cry.
Like, I still remember you, and this is kind of off topic, but, we do like a good off topic. But I still remember you leading you at children's court, and you were just kind of standing there, and someone said, "Oh, that's Rose," and I looked over, and you were like this foreboding, clearly annoyed person that's standing there, and I thought to myself, "Wow, you're so strong."
Oh, hilarious!
I know it is.
I was just born with this face, and it's not always incongruent with what I'm feeling. I just think my facials give off a certain something, and sometimes I'm fully aware of it incongruent. with my facials, and other times like that time I was probably thinking about dinner.
You probably were. Knowing that now.
Yeah.
But at the time I thought, wow, she's so serious.
Food is always close to my mind. I was probably not even thinking anything like what you were thinking.
You were probably thinking, when's lunch? How long does this have to go on for? When's lunch?
Yeah, absolutely. Anyway, do you want to talk about the systemic perspective?
So,
and how that applies to social workers?
I guess it's about the fact that social workers are trained to consider the person within their environment. Like, that's just the way that we kind of practice, isn't it? It's all about how does this person interact with their world?
Mm.
And then how does the loss or the grief they're experiencing kind of impact on how they kind of work within their world? That makes sense.
It does make sense. And I think I do a bit of work for an insurance company, and with people who have experienced traumatic brain injuries and sometimes, lost a limb because of a motor vehicle accident. And the way in which social workers view their clients and the work is, you can tell when I step into that forum, that company, that it's so foreign to them, because they'll say things like, why are you even talking about this?
Yeah.
Like, your job is about recovery and promoting independence. Absolutely. But I, like the other social workers that work in this program too, we talk about the impacts of grief and loss, or, how they're emotionally functioning or socially. If all of a sudden I've got one leg amputated and I've got a traumatic brain injury, I have no informal supports, then that's obviously an area that social workers want to really provide case coordination to and impact. And the company's like, no, it's only injury related. And there's a bit of tension, great word, because we're trying to promote that it's all injury related, and the impact on this person's social life, their emotional regulation, how even they go and get their groceries is impacted from the injuries. And you can't separate, you can't just work on a brain injury and an amputation and leave the rest of the person. It's a real struggle. And I think it's that systemic perspective that we bring that maybe irritates the company, but it is quite unique to social workers. When I listen to the other professionals, because it's often a wide range of other professionals that also do this work, you can spot the social worker because they're always talking about that perspective.
Do you know, I kind of find out about a lot of different things though. Like, I think it's that stuff that we've talked about before, about how it feels like you're talking a different language at times. And I think if you think about professions that might be more kind of incident focused or internally focused, it's more about how the person, how whatever's happened to this person kind of impacts on the person, and doesn't take that step to think about that person dead in their environment. When you might, that might be your way of kind of working. You're very much around the person and the influence on the person. And then you have someone like us come along and go, yeah, that's all well and good. We know that this is having a huge impact on this person internally, but how do they then live the world in a safe way? And it is like you're talking a different language.
Yes.
There's this disconnect, I think, between maybe it's about importance. Why that would be important.
Yes.
I think I'm badly trying to spit this out, but I think there's an example in my mind. So it's about this example I'm thinking of is about, two siblings who have had some really big experiences of abuse in their lives that in the very, very early years has meant that they've been really kind of connected, emotionally, physically connected, because they had to look after each other.
Okay.
Yeah. So they were like this very tight little unit. They went and for years, we're talking first 5 years for the older sibling of her life, and then the younger sibling's was about 2 when removed. So it's a significant period of time that crossed some really important developmental milestones. Yeah. And so then these children went into a foster care placement. They were removed, went to a foster care placement. Then there was a lot of focus, I think, on the parentified behaviours of the older sibling. And there was a lot of focus on trying to take that role from the sibling for the right reasons. But there wasn't a lot of acknowledgement about what that actually meant in terms of the loss of that role.
I was going to say, huge loss of role there.
For both of them. So the loss of the role for the younger one, because this younger one was very much used to the older one looking after them. That's right. So the older sibling used to cook for the baby, used to change the baby's nappy, used to do everything.
So we're not talking about incidental parenting here. We're talking about very considered, attuned, know what needs to be done, and I'll feel that boy.
That's right. So really performed all care roles for the younger sibling. Probably is the only reason that younger sibling lived.
Right.
To be fair, because nobody else was doing the caring for this child. Yeah. So the younger one, really didn't really get a lot of support around grieving the loss of the role. The younger one definitely didn't get a lot of support about grieving the loss of the role. There was just an expectation that you are safe now, you don't need to do that anymore.
The adult's job.
It's the adult's job. And I know that that's important. And I know that I've said that myself, about children. But when I look back now, I think I wish that I'd understood. I wish that I'd helped her and others like her go through, and the younger sibling, but helped them to kind of really acknowledge the grief.
Yes. And I think that's where the HE model that we talked about last episode, so the ambiguous loss lens, can be really utilised to help children grieve the loss of that role.
Yeah, it is about the role. And what's happened for this sibling group since they were first placed is that I'm just going to name it. From a systematic perspective, really, their relationship has just been decimated. What's the word I'm looking for?
Not dismantled.
I'm trying not to swear.
Swear. What's it side on the podcast? It's all fine.
No.
Has been dismantled?
Completely dismissed. I'm going to use the word dismissed. Okay. Their sibling role has been completely dismissed and really annihilated. And they're really strong words, but that's actually what's happened. And so, I think these kids have probably been in care now for probably maybe 8 years, something like that.
So still quite young. And I say that because if you think of it from that lens, from how young they actually are, this is quite I don't know the words, it's extreme, because it's not like they're 40 and they've got years of processing and years of other experiences. This is their entire lives has been either caring for a younger sibling whilst being abused and neglected and then removed, having that role taken off them, and now separated.
But also being blamed for still hanging on to that role. For both of them. So being blamed for the younger one seeing the older sister in a caring role, and for the older one seeing herself in a caring role.
See how pervasive that must be for them each and every day. Yeah. Like this isn't recent, this isn't historical events. This is impacts that would be pervasive on their daily functioning.
And it makes me so sad because I honestly do think that the system has not assisted these siblings to remain together.
So you're doing advocacy, emotional support, maybe at times some practical assistance, other referrals, and trying to, coordinate the needs that you can't meet practically for this person, and then a systemic perspective as well.
Well, I think there is a systemic perspective to this case that I kind of think about a lot. And I think about how unfair it is on that sibling role. And that's, we know sibling relationships should be the paramount concern for anybody that works with siblings in terms of keeping that role really strong.
So, yes, but you're doing all of the roles of social work. See, I'm trying to highlight how all the roles of social work, you're doing that all and working from a grief and loss and an ambiguous loss framework and probably an attachment framework too.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
That's a sad story.
It's a very sad story, but I think about it often because I just think how sad it is that the roles that these children have lost the most important roles in their lives.
Yes. And the most important given their lifespan to date. It's been so short. Like it's a significant part of their life.
And I also wonder why that was allowed to occur, and two, and that I think is where I put some systems abuse.
Yeah.
I don't know on that. But two, why other people do not see it. And I think that's that disconnect between maybe the way that we would see it as a social worker and the way that maybe some other disciplines or professions might be it.
It's a good story to highlight that, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I know that story is not, it's not like a lone example either.
No. It's frustrating, isn't it, at times? When you're like, it makes so much sense in our world, in our social work world, and why can't everyone just see it from this lens? Why does everyone not understand what's happening?
Yeah, it's frustrating, but it's also really sad, I think. And it's really sad when you think about the impact of this non-understanding or this not understanding has on actual people.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Should we talk about, you said before we were going to talk a little bit about the kind of, the
grief and trauma collide?
Yeah.
Yes. I think when we were looking at preparing for this episode and trying to think about how it does apply to social work, I mean, very lucky in Australia, we don't have mass school shootings like some countries do. And so it's made me think about what is the role of social workers in other countries where there's, really traumatic events. And we obviously have traumatic events in Australia, don't get me wrong. But I guess the first thing that came to my head was I'm sure there'd be a role for social workers in the countries where mass shootings occur often. And thinking about other just natural disasters, the floods in Texas recently, when there's big natural events that occur that devastate communities and people and families. And what's the role of social work then when the trauma and the grief collide?
What about kind of also the role of social work in countries where there's wars raging? Yeah,
absolutely.
In countries where there's, populations of people that are being wiped out. Does social work have a role in that scenario? I would imagine
we would argue yes,
but we wouldn't
be. But we wouldn't have any.
We wouldn't know about that
lived experience around that. But I guess I think about the social workers that work in settling immigrants into Australia, like in the grief and loss that must be such a focus of their work in the Australian context, and again, working with stolen generations and the grief and loss, loss of language, loss of culture, loss of family, loss of so many things. And it was, I guess, just a way for me to help frame that there is grief and loss, but then I think there's this traumatic and grief kind of collision that also occurs. And if you think about the role of social work in those spaces and how skilled social workers need to be to work in those spaces, I guess is where I was going, and how then your self-care as a social worker needs to be really considered and good, because to work in such a traumatic space requires you to be your best self. So that requires a lot of self-care, I think.
Yeah, so you're kind of talking about the impact, the vicarious trauma impact of working.
which we kind of touched on when we did our resilience episode. And I guess that's that common thread, that these are not kind of standalone episodes, or in social work, they're not standalone. Like, we don't go, oh, grief and loss tick, we've dealt with that on the case plan, or we've done that in counselling and we move on.
Yeah.
These threads, you know, are seen through most of our social work. And whilst we might be in private practice, a social worker practicing in Texas right now might be still working in, you know, a very acute stage of that grief and loss in relation to their recent floods and the loss of life and property, you know, or whatever it may be across the world, wherever you're listening from, or across Australia, that traumatic bereavement, where that grief is disrupted by the traumatic nature of a death, and the role of social work in that.
I'd love to hear from social workers that work in those kind of practice areas. You know, those kind of really big, like you said, natural disasters, or even like, you know, war environments. I'd love to hear what the social work role is like. Because it isn't something that I would ever experience.
It's hard to imagine, isn't it?
It's really hard to imagine. Yeah, it's really hard to imagine. But I know that there would be some amazing practice happening.
Yes. And curious what the grief and loss lens looks like.
Yes.
Yes.
How it's applied.
How it's applied and the tools used.
I mean, honestly, let us know. Send us an email, relationalpractice01@gmail.com. Send us a message. We would love to know what your practice looks like, if that's something you've had experience with.
Yeah. And I'm curious too on the coping strategies that may look self-destructive, but are actually just survival strategies, and how we then help as social workers explain that to non-social workers, that, you know, this is actually about survival. This isn't about having a great coping strategy or making a conscious choice, you know, to do something today. It's just about survival and how we might use our advocacy in that way. See, and this is why I shouldn't have went, ugh, when you said grief and loss.
No, you can say that. That's fine. I'm fine for you to say that about anything. Do you know what that reminds me of? And I kind of, you know, only because this is my frame of reference when you were talking, it reminds me of the use of that really kind of black, dark humor as a coping strategy, particularly amongst teams. Like when you work in a team environment, there might have been some, you know, like a big event that happened, and as a team, you've all responded. And then you kind of, you know, you finish managing whatever the issue was, and then kind of the black humor that comes out about that, and how that can be misconstrued by other people as being really inappropriate.
Yes. And there'd been almost like a shelf life on how long you're allowed to engage in that dark humor. And then, because you remember too, when high up managers would come down and be like, the culture here is despicable. The use of black humor is inappropriate, and we have no place for that in these walls. And that's just the coping strategy.
Yeah, it's that stuff we've said before. It's a coping strategy. It's not right, it's not wrong, but it's a strategy, and there's a reason why that strategy is being employed. The impact might be detrimental or might be problematic, but the actual strategy is just a strategy.
Yeah, I think about that since we talked about that a few weeks ago, and you know, I have been thinking about this quite high up manager coming down and saying, "That's it, pack it away. I'm drawing a line under it. No more. As of this minute, there will be no more black humor in these walls."
Oh, did it work?
No. It made it worse, to be honest.
Of course it was.
It's like another rock in that invisible backpack we carry. Put a rock in it, labelled it, you know, being treated like 5-year-olds now at work.
Well, because that would automatically, as soon as that person left, you would all just be laughing, and someone would be mimicking exactly what they said.
And it's like it's a misassessment, isn't it? They've come in and seen the black humor as a problem, not understood why is this their coping strategy? What has happened? What have we not addressed? Or how can we help fill a space that needs to be filled? You know, it's those other questions that typically social workers ask. This person wasn't a social worker, but just like, today, we're done. This time.
Imagine being so high on yourself that you think that you just saying something like that makes it so.
Well,
Do you know what I mean?
there are people like that. Heaps of people like that in the world. I'm going to say it, it's going to happen.
So disturbing.
Yeah.
So disturbing.
It's crazy.
It's so crazy. You must have been shocked. Were you shocked when that person came down and kind of...
I think I knew at first, and I got that, that warning look, the I'll take you on, and I was like, oh,
serious.
I don't have a poker face, but I'll pull my mouth back. My face doesn't need subtitles. It speaks for itself. I'm sure that was a moment of actual congruence where I was like, right.
Yeah.
And then when they left, I was like, as if we'll just do it covertly. Made it worse.
Mm-hmm.
But really, it was showing there was something that needed addressing in our space, but we won't address it. We'll just, talk about the culture.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. That's crazy, isn't it? Someone thought they had that much power. Okay, delusional you.
Yeah.
Whatever you say, we'll make it happen.
Tomorrow.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. Yeah. All right. Is there anything else?
Anything else about grief and loss?
I don't think so.
I think like it is very large scale. There's lots of things we haven't mentioned in relation to what things people might grieve over or feel a loss over, but it's because it is such a big topic and it does intersect social work in so many different ways. So I was reading this morning this amazing social worker whose name is Judith Nelson. She's from the USA, and she was talking to a group of social workers and asked them and practitioners to consider their clients through a lens of separation, loss and grief. So from an attachment and grief and loss lens. And the activity was make a list of all your clients that have experienced grief and loss. And that just became so overwhelming for the practitioners, because if you think about divorce, death, relocation, immigration, empty nesting, retirement, infertility, job loss, drugs and alcohol, I think of all the different areas you can lose or grieve over. Mm-hmm. The activity then became write a list of clients who haven't experienced grief and loss.
Yeah.
And the practitioners couldn't name anyone.
No.
And I think that just shows how central grief and loss is to social work and how it's a presenting problem or at least an underlying issue essentially for every client that social workers work with.
Yeah.
Or every policy that's written.
Yeah, I agree. And I guess the purpose of our conversation today was about just reminding everyone about how important it is to adopt that lens when and where appropriate, because it won't always be appropriate. You can always have this understanding that grief and loss is permeated through this person's life and influencing their current presentation, but it might not always be appropriate to come from a grief and loss lens. But other times it might be.
Yes.
And it's just about, it's this gentle reminder that it is a thing. It's an important thing to consider.
All right.
Can I just, before we end, just want to remind everyone that we are doing a Q&A session. And we are asking people to send us questions about so many different things, really.
I think you said anything.
Well, basically anything, really. Anything about us you want to know. Anything about practice you think we could kind of answer. Yeah. And I'm really keen to hear about practice stories about people that have worked in big disasters or war zones, just to hear around practice and what social work practice looks like in those settings. So please send us that information as well. But remember, we are having that Q&A session. We don't have a date for the session, but we're asking people could send us in questions by the 19th of September.
21st of September, I changed it.
21st of September.
Give people the weekend. We're all so busy.
Yeah. So please, I'm super excited, and Rose is becoming super excited about our Q&A session. All right. So this does bring us to the end of another episode of Relational Practice, a social work podcast. We hope today's discussion was valuable for your practice.
Oh, I really hope so. To ensure you're always in the loop, please follow our podcast. Your subscription and social media engagement helps us to build our community and make these important conversations more accessible to other social workers.
Absolutely.
Thanks for listening, guys. Stay safe and remember to always practice relationally.
Thank you.
See you next time.
But maybe someday